In an instant, all my sympathy vanished. A chill ran down my spine. The woman I loved for 5 years took Jack's money, wanted to deceive Jack, and now wanted to deceive my future, enjoying the best of both worlds. Even at my poorest, I never allowed myself to become like this. My voice turned hoarse. Mary, did you change after graduation? Or were you always like this, and I just didn't see it? Seth, you know how much I loved you these 5 years. I really had no choice, but I also don't want to lose you. I can't let go. Mary's voice trembled. I smiled bitterly, lowering my eyes. 5 years isn't just a game. Those days of buying groceries, cooking, budgeting, and saving money, we spent them laughing. But the more unforgettable the past, the more unbearable the present. I took a deep breath. Mary, I don't blame you for fearing poverty, but wanting me to be the third wheel disgusts me. Give up. I won't wait for you. Once I am disgusted by someone, I won't look at them again. There was a moment of silence before Mary's voice turned cold and hurt. You find me disgusting? Is it that gold card that gives you the confidence? Seth, you're the one who changed. I hung up the phone hard, cutting off Mary's voice. I wished I could go back 5 years and slap myself awake. I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, but kept having nightmares. One moment it was my dad with young women, the next it was Mary with Jack, and finally, a heavy rain soaking me through. Suddenly, an umbrella opened over my head, shielding me from the storm. After several nights of nightmares, Friday arrived. I went to work early, only to see Mary and Jack holding hands at the entrance of our company. I walked past them into the building, and Jack, as usual, started mocking. Seth, did you find a sugar daddy? Can you afford the real thing, or are you still used to fakes? I laughed in anger. Today was my dad's birthday, and to show that my mom and I were doing well, I wore the clothes my mom had given me. Who would have thought that after 4 years, Jack's habits hadn't changed? In college, I accidentally brought a watch my mom bought me from home to school. At that time, Jack, who hated me, pointed at my watch in front of Mary, saying it was a good fake and that if I was so vain, I should find a rich woman to get the real thing. Mary was so angry she argued with Jack and promised to earn money to buy me the real thing one day. Today, she watched coldly as Jack mocked me, saying nothing. I entered the company and sat at my desk, still trembling inside. But I didn't have time to calm down because my mom suddenly called me to her office. I was puzzled as I walked to her office. When I arrived, I saw Mary and Jack sitting on the sofa. Jack glanced at me smugly and said to my mom, Miss Smith, Seth is my college classmate. Now that he's working in your company, please take good care of him. Seth, Miss Smith is a good friend of my mom. If you have any difficulties, just go to her, he said with a tone of arrogance. I finally understood why Mary and Jack were at my mom's company. My mom must have canceled the orders from Mary's company, so Jack came to pull some strings. My mom patted my shoulder and whispered in my ear, The CEO of Mary's company just told me that they didn't know you were my son. Whether their company supplies us or not is up to you. We don't need their supplies that bad. As my mom whispered to me, Jack realized what was happening and sneered at Mary, his eyes darting between me and my mom, as if suspecting something improper. Looks like Seth's clothes aren't fake, he said. Mary blushed furiously, glaring at me as if I had betrayed her. After a few seconds, she lowered her head, took out some documents from her briefcase, and handed them to me with trembling hands. Seth, please take another look. Our company's equipment is the most advanced on the market, and we can offer discounts. I tossed the documents onto the table. I'll look at them when I have time. I didn't want to see them any longer, so I turned and left my mom's office, immersing myself in work until it was time to leave for my dad's birthday. As soon as I stepped out of the company, I saw Mary and Jack standing at the entrance. Mary looked at me with disdain. What right do you have to find me disgusting? I didn't even bother to explain. Move? Jack sneered, pulling Mary along. Let's not bother with him. I know Miss Smith has a husband. I'll call him and ask if he knows there's someone named Seth in the company. I ignored him and looked at my phone. My dad, blocked on iMessenger, had sent me a text. You know my good friend, Robert. His daughter is downstairs waiting to pick you up. I looked up to see a black Mercedes G-Class slowly approaching. Not wanting to deal with Mary and Jack any longer, I quickly opened the car door and jumped in, almost desperately saying, "Please drive, thank you." The car accelerated, whisking me away from their sight. I let out a long sigh of relief, only to hear a low laugh beside me. "It looks like you've seen a ghost." The voice was familiar and pleasant. I turned sharply and blurted out, "Grace? Why are you here?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "Didn't your dad tell you?" I told him I wanted to pick you up. I couldn't help but marvel at how small the world was. A college classmate turned out to be my dad's friend's daughter. Then I felt a wave of relief, thinking how lucky I was that Jack didn't know it was Grace picking me up, or he would have eaten me alive. Grace rubbed her temples. "Don't mention him. He gives me a headache." I laughed silently. A year after graduation, Grace hadn't changed much, except she now looked at me with a bit more amusement. "Why is it so hard to add you on Facebook?" I blushed, silently taking out my phone to add her. Grace chuckled. "Why so reluctant? I just confessed to you once. I didn't cling to you. What are you afraid of?" I pursed my lips, too embarrassed to say that I didn't want to add her because of her dad's reputation. He was my dad's friend, notorious for his exploits in the nightlife scene. No decent person would want to be associated with them. Thinking about how many boys chased after Grace in college, I felt even more grateful for my polite refusal back then. My silence made Grace's smile fade. She seemed to know what I was thinking and suddenly frowned slightly. "Seth, I have nothing to do with my dad anymore. Since college, I haven't taken a penny from him. I'm planning to give up my inheritance soon." I was puzzled and confused. His money is much more than my dad's. Even if Grace has made a lot of money now, it can't compare to her dad's wealth. Such a big fortune. How can she just give it up? I was also confused about why she was telling me this. What did it have to do with me? Grace stopped at a red light and turned to look at me seriously. "The only reason I haven't given up my inheritance and still keep in touch with my dad is because he knows your dad. Do you want to know why?" I swallowed. Grace's eyes were captivating, slightly upturned. In the confined space of the car, few men could resist her gaze. I looked out the window but couldn't help my curiosity. "Why?" Grace said softly, "Unfortunately, I can't tell you." I choked on my saliva, coughing. "Then why bring it up?" Grace smiled without answering, turning on some soothing music that helped me relax. I closed my eyes and fell asleep without realizing it. I only slept for about 10 minutes, but it was the best sleep I'd had in a while. When I woke up, the car was already at the restaurant. Grace gestured for me to get out. "You go in first. I'll park the car." I stretched and got out, feeling refreshed and in a better mood. As soon as I entered the restaurant, I cursed my luck. I saw Mary again. She was hurrying down the hallway, but stopped when she saw me. She walked over with a cold face. "What are you doing here?" I walked past her. "None of your business." She grabbed my arm. "Seth, think it over. Ms. Smith has a husband, but I'm different. I really can't let you go. If you come back now, it's not too late. Once I land a big deal, I'll be promoted to vice president, and I'll make sure you live a good life." I sighed, wondering if I had been blind back then. I smiled at her. "What if I don't agree?" Mary's face darkened. "This is your last chance. Don't regret it when I make it big." I shook off her hand and walked quickly to my dad's reserved room. Mary followed me, forcing me to walk faster until I almost crashed into the room. Mary followed me in, and before I could turn around to scold her, I froze at the sight of the people inside. Jack was there, along with a middle-aged couple who looked somewhat like him. Jack looked at me and then at Mary. "How did you two run into each other?" "Seth, did you come to the wrong room? There's no one here you should know." Mary didn't hesitate, walking past me to sit next to Jack and greet the couple. "Uncle, Aunt, I'm sorry." Then she turned to my dad. "Mr. Brooke, I'm Jack's girlfriend, Mary." My dad ignored her, smiling and reaching out to me. "Seth, come sit next to me." I stood there, not knowing how to react. My dad, seeing I wasn't moving, came over and pulled me to sit next to him. "What are you standing there for? We were waiting for you. We won't start without you." He affectionately pulled me to his side and introduced me to the couple. "This is Seth." Mary's lips trembled, and my dad, eager to show off, whispered to me, "Your mom called me to get back at them. In this city, Business people are all in the same circle. Mary's company started by subcontracting my projects. Setting up a meeting was easy. Just then, Jack laughed and asked, "Mr. Brooke, is this your friend?" His voice was dripping with sarcasm. My dad cleared his throat, patted my shoulder. "Can't you tell? This is my only son. He takes after his mom's last name." He even leaned his face close to mine to show our resemblance. But no one was looking at our faces. They were all drawn to the sound of a cup shattering. Mary had dropped her teacup. Everyone stared at her, but she seemed oblivious, her hands shaking as she stared at me in disbelief, as if she had seen a ghost. Jack pinched her hard, but he wasn't much better off, his eyes wide with shock. Jack's dad frowned at Mary, while my dad tried to smooth things over. "This is your daughter-in-law." He smiled. "My son likes her, and she's quite capable. Let's give them a chance." My dad seemed not to notice Mary's pale face, smiling. "Finding a good daughter-in-law is a blessing. My son used to date someone who thought he was from an ordinary family. When she found out the truth, she left him for a richer man. Isn't that infuriating?" Mary's face turned ashen, her eyes fixed on me, a hint of red at the corners, as if I had wronged her. This was a blessing in disguise. Losing such an ungrateful and short-sighted girl was a gain. My dad stood up. "I'll say this. If I meet this person in business, I won't go easy on them. I've learned that parents should be involved in their children's relationships. Today, I brought Grace. Seth, take a look. She started her own business in college and doesn't rely on men. Isn't she better than those who live off others?" He said this while pulling Grace into the room. "This is my friend's daughter, Grace." There was another loud crash as Jack's chopsticks fell to the floor. He looked at me and then at Grace. "Why are you here?" Grace sat next to me. "Why can't I be here? If Seth is here, so am I." She poured me a cup of tea and smiled at my dad. "I confessed to Seth in college, but he rejected me because he was committed to Mary. I've waited 5 years for him to break up, and now I have another chance." With each word Grace said, Jack's face turned paler. His eyes filled with venom as he glared at me. My dad was also surprised. The situation was too chaotic for me to respond. I just listened as Grace smiled and said to Mary, "Mary, why would you give up such a good guy like Seth? And Jack, why are you so fixated on Seth's girlfriend? I heard you even paid the down payment for a car." Mary quickly grabbed the BMW keys from the table, but it was too late. Jack's dad was already glaring at her with a dark expression. Business people could easily understand the underlying implications. Unfortunately, Jack lacked his dad's shrewdness. His eyes darted around, and he suddenly smiled at me. "But Seth has a good relationship with Ms. Smith. Why would he work as a finance staff in her company instead of his dad's?" "Jack!" His dad scolded him sharply, apologizing to my dad. My dad continued to smooth things over. "That's because Ms. Smith is Seth's mom. I forgot to mention that Seth takes after his mom's last name." The room fell silent. After a while, she whispered, "What about the order today?" I had had enough of these two. I took a bite of food, chewed slowly, and then said, "I canceled it." I looked at Mary's embarrassed face and added slowly, "The initial cooperation was because of my mom. Now that we've broken up, is there a problem with canceling the order?" Mary looked at me in disbelief, a hint of shame in her eyes, and suddenly stood up and walked out. Jack wanted to say something, but his dad pulled him up, apologizing to my dad as they left. My dad cheerfully saw them to the door. "Let me know when the kids get married. I'll attend the wedding." The only response was the sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway. The meal ended quickly. My dad was in high spirits, constantly praising Grace. After I finished eating, Grace asked me to take her home. My dad was happy to see this, but as I got into the car, he whispered to me, "Seth, your mom and I have been apart for so long. Why don't you talk to her about getting back together? You could have a complete family." I was amused and annoyed. "You think my mom would take you back?" Snowflakes began to fall outside, but the car was warm, making me drowsy again. Just as I was dozing off, I heard Grace say, "Seth, would you consider me?" Her tone was casual, but there was a hint of nervousness. I looked at Grace, who raised an eyebrow lazily, as if joking. So I replied in kind, "I'm not interested in dating." Grace smiled without saying anything, and I closed my eyes to rest. After a while, I heard a faint sigh. After that day, Jack and Mary finally quieted down for a few days, but Grace started appearing in my life more and more. When I went to work, her car was parked outside my house. When I got off work, she was waiting at the company entrance. If I refused her ride and took the subway, she would leave her car and accompany me on the subway. Grace was actually quite pleasant as a friend. Talking with her every night became an important part of my life. Mary never liked to listen, but Grace enjoyed hearing me talk, no matter how trivial the subject. Because she was willing to listen to my ramblings, I couldn't refuse when she invited me to dinner. Gradually, she became my regular lunch and dinner companion. Grace was never mentioned by me, but her presence still caught my mom's attention. One day, while Grace and I were eating downstairs from the company, I saw my mom sneaking around outside, completely ruining her usual authoritative image. After being caught, my mom coughed and joined us, accepting our invitation to share the table. As she left, she adjusted her clothes and said casually, "She's reliable." I had no idea how she determined that, given she spent most of the time wiping her nose and only exchanged a few words with Grace. Sensing my doubt, my mom said, "Even if she's not good, it doesn't matter. As long as you like her, I'll back you up." Then she walked out of the restaurant with long strides, not even paying the bill. Grace stood up to pay, scanning the code and smiling back at me. "See, even your mom approves of me. Seth, you should consider me." Honestly, if it weren't for her dad's notorious reputation, I might have considered it. But the scene at the mall was unforgettable, which might also explain why I hid my background and lived a frugal life with Mary. I lowered my head, not saying anything. Grace was silent for a moment, then said, "If you don't want to consider it, that's fine. How about I take you home?" My heart skipped a beat. Her voice sounded familiar again, but I couldn't place where I had heard it before. Grace drove me home, and as soon as I lay down, my phone started buzzing. Jack seemed drunk, sending voice messages in our college group, cursing me for betraying him, accusing me of stringing along both Mary and Grace. No one could calm him down until Grace sent a message, "Jack, give me your number. I'll call you." Jack went silent and stopped sending voice messages. I was still fuming when Mary called. I answered irritably, "What do you want? To laugh at me?" Mary, sounding drunk, pleaded, "Can you give me another chance?" I was shocked she could even say that. Mary, with a thick nasal tone, said, "The company rejected me, and the deal I secured fell through. Seth, I'm not trying to come back because of your background. I just realized I'm not as smart as I thought. You're the only one who treated me like a good person. I miss you." She cried, but the more upset she was, the more I found it ironic. I coldly interrupted her. "And what did I get in return? Your betrayal. You bringing your lover to humiliate me. And now you want me to be the third wheel? Mary, I treated you well for 5 years. How did you repay me? Do you think I would dare to come back?" Mary was silent for a long time. Just as I was about to hang up, she said in a trembling voice, "But why did you lie to me? Weren't you playing games, afraid I'd ask for money? Seth, you never were honest with me from the start. Do you think you did everything right? Are all rich kids like this, playing with people's feelings?" I closed my eyes. I was wrong to hide it. "But Mary, do you remember how sensitive and proud you were in college? How much you hated having a boyfriend who was better off than you? And before you cheated, I was going to tell you. My mom already knew about you. After you cheated, I wanted to tell you, but you wanted me to be the third wheel. What else was there to say?" I asked Mary, word by word. "Mary, do you really think being poor justifies betraying and hurting me? Can your conscience really be at peace? Look at yourself. Are you still the Mary the first loved?" A few seconds later, the call ended. I couldn't sleep at all. Then Jack called. Grace called me. "Seth, why didn't you tell me? Grace liked you since she was 16. She went to our school because of you. Why didn't you tell me? How could you let me make a fool of myself?" Jack shouted, "You made me look like a joke?" Jack continued, "Don't play dumb. You must be thrilled. You're so cunning, Seth. Did you enjoy watching me make a fool of myself?" Then he hung up. I was furious, ready to call back and curse him, but a sudden thought struck me like lightning. My head buzzed and I called Grace. Did you know me before? Grace didn't answer directly, her voice a bit sad. I'm downstairs. I looked out the window and saw her leaning against her car, looking up at me. She smiled bitterly. I rushed down and ran to her. When I reached her, I could only ask, "Who are you?" She opened an umbrella over my head. "I'll walk you home. Don't cry, okay?" I froze, my head buzzing. Grace extended her hand. "Let me formally introduce myself. I'm Grace. When I was 16, I followed my dad to catch him cheating, hoping my mom would give up on him. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Grace gently wiped my tears. "Didn't I promise? From the moment you walked in, I forgot everything. But keeping that promise meant you were hurt by others." She held my hand. "Today, I'm breaking that promise. Seth, I don't want to lose you again. I've waited so long, and I can't wait any longer." Her hand holding mine was the same as the one holding the umbrella back then. I slowly nodded and pulled her into my arms. "Why didn't you confess earlier? Maybe I wouldn't have been with Mary." "It's not too late now. We have a long future ahead," she whispered against my chest. After Grace and I got together, both my parents were happy, but Grace's dad was not. Grace cut ties with him and gave up her inheritance. She said, if it weren't for my scolding, he might have cut ties with me when I was 16. My dad thought he was the matchmaker and went to brag to my mom, only to find she had blocked him again. He was furious. "Seth, tell that woman if she doesn't reconcile, I'll remarry." Annoyed by his pestering, I told my mom. Dad said if you don't reconcile, he'll remarry. My mom was stunned for a moment, then sneered, "Wish him luck with his next wife." A few days later, my mom invited Grace and me to dinner. She had just had some cosmetic treatments and looked years younger. I took a photo of her and posted it on social media, captioning it, "Starting a new chapter." My dad called frantically, and I realized I had forgotten to block him. When I answered, he was frantic. "What new chapter? Did your mom find someone else?" "She won't leave me." My dad shouted, "Where are you? I need to talk to her." A woman with money but no family is useless. She might find a young man and not leave you any money. I asked, "Aren't you getting remarried? Why do you care?" My dad's voice was hoarse. I was lying. I wanted to make her anxious. I looked at my mom, not daring to give the address. She took the phone and gave it to him. "Come over. We need to talk." My dad arrived quickly, bursting into the room. "This is ridiculous. I was just a bit playful when I was young. I've been apologizing for years. You said you'd find someone else. What do you take me for?" I watched my mom nervously, but she was unusually calm. She lifted her shirt, revealing a deep scar on her stomach. I gasped, not knowing she had such a scar. She said to my dad, "This is from when Seth was in college. I offended a competitor, and they hired someone to stab me. I almost died. If it were you, would you sleep with someone who stabbed you?" My dad was shocked, shaking his head, reaching out to touch her stomach, but she moved away. Tears welled up in my mom's eyes, someone who never cried. She said she had tried to call my dad to arrange things for me, but he was unreachable. She asked, "Where were you? Celebrating your mistress's birthday?" My dad's face turned red, stammering, "I didn't know. If I had known, I wouldn't have ignored you." My mom shook her head. "It's too late. He only stabbed me once, but you stabbed me repeatedly, leaving holes in my heart." She patted her chest. My dad was stunned, staring at her scar for a long time before sitting down, pouring himself a drink and downing it. Tears welled up in his eyes. "There's still hope. I can change." For the first time, I saw guilt in his eyes. My mom sat down, "Not in this lifetime." My dad was shocked, then started crying like a child who had lost his favorite toy. We let him cry in the restaurant, finishing our meal and leaving. On the way home, I felt a deep sorrow for my mom, wondering what she had endured to raise me. Grace kissed my forehead. "Seth, before we get married, I'll give you half of my shares." I was stunned. She explained, "I have other shareholders. If I give you everything, they won't allow it." "It's not that. I don't want your money. I'm just curious why you're saying this now." She sighed. "If your mom or my mom had half their husband's shares, they wouldn't have suffered so much. Sometimes money is the only weapon to protect oneself. I'm giving you this weapon. I asked, what if I take your shares and break up with you? Grace laughed. Then I misjudged you, and it's a lesson I have to learn. I kissed her cheek. Instead of thinking about that, why not think about when we should get married? Grace turned, her face lighting up. Really? I nodded. The shares don't matter. What matters is that you give me the courage to get married. A few days before our wedding, Grace posted a wedding photo in our college group. Everyone congratulated us, except Jack, who left the group. On our wedding day, my mom was beaming, while my dad looked dejected and much older. I teased him, don't be sad. You said you have plenty of women around you. You don't need my mom. My dad waved his hand, looking weary. Don't mock me. I won't find anyone else. I didn't know if he was serious or not, and I didn't know how to respond, so I just sighed. During the toast, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Mary, her voice hoarse. You got married today? I took a deep breath. Yes. She laughed bitterly. I'm getting engaged too. I smiled. Congratulations. Mary paused, then said softly, I don't know if I'll be happy, but at least I won't worry about my parents' medical bills or rent. I congratulated her. Congratulations. Mary continued, Seth, I called to say I really loved you, but I lost to poverty. I hung up, not agreeing with her, but there was no point in arguing. Grace came over with a glass of wine. What's wrong? I took a deep breath, looking at her gentle smile. Nothing, just feeling lucky to have met you. I clinked my glass with hers and drank. Thank you for holding the umbrella for me. Grace smiled, drinking her wine. Thank you for letting me hold the umbrella.